Permit me to introduce myself. I'm Dr. Robert Baker. Uh, I've decided to do this video, this introduction, in a series of videos in honor of, or in the memory actually, of my late mother and father, Kate and Ben Baker, and especially to celebrate the 2012 International Stuttering Awareness Day, which is today. In my clinical and theoretical training, first to get my PhD in psychology, and then to go on to get my PsyD in psychology, in psychoanalysis, I discovered that there was a glitch in the early development of the thinking process that probably causes stuttering. Or, to say it in another way, in the very early couple months of an infant's life, there seems to be a glitch in the original thought process development that causes stuttering. I'd like to talk about my personal story now, because I find it actually very exciting. In hindsight, folks, not at the time. I was stuttering from the first time I could talk until I was about 50 years old, actually a few years before that. And I will tell you what happened then. But first, let me tell you about my early life. Is when I was in the LA Unified School System, in my, say, 7, 8 years old, I was placed in speech pathology, and they tried, but nothing was successful. Then, when I was about 13 or about 14 years old, my parents, especially my mom, when she hear about something about stuttering, we were there. We tried at the Neuropsychiatric Institute at UCLA, and I went through it. It was a clinical study they had there. It's for stuttering. It didn't work. Then I tried at the Ziff Speech Foundation, which was a center or foundation for people who stuttered or for children who stuttered very severely. That didn't work. And so I tried everything that was imaginable. Didn't work. Then I graduated high school at Fairfax High. It was a plug for that. And then all of a sudden, I was in my 20s. I tried some more. Didn't work. Then I was in my mid-30s, and I had heard, and I don't remember how, but I had heard there was a Dr. Martin Schwartz in Manhattan on the East Coast, and he had developed a technique that was called the airflow technique. He would come out here at a hotel, and he'd see about 12 patients at the same time. We sit around a table. That didn't seem to work either. Well, by that time I had tried everything, so I basically had given up hope. So then all of a sudden, for reasons I would just say that there was a girl I became attracted to, and her father was a teacher at this institute, or at a college, you might say. It's called an institute, but it's basically college. And I was sitting in a class one day, and it was called the Introduction to Psychoanalysis, and I had no intention of becoming either a psychologist or a psychoanalyst. I was simply there because I was trying to find favor with the woman through her father. Well, we were using a book. It's called the Introduction to Psychoanalysis. And on the last night of the class, we were able to ask any question. And in the book, on some page in the back of the book, it said the reason that a child stutters, for childhood stuttering, is because of this. And as I was stuttering profusely, he looked at me, he said, "We know that is not the reason." And he was a he was not a child analyst, he was an analyst, very seasoned for about 40 years, but he was basically a classical analyst, a Freudian. He said, "We know that which the doctor who wrote that book, the psychoanalyst who wrote that book, That's not true. That was written back in the 50s. But he looked directly at me like this and said, you, because you have lived the experience as you're living right now of stuttering, why don't you do your dissertation, your PhD dissertation, on the etiology, the genesis of stuttering, and find out for once in your life whether it is physical or whether it's emotional or somewhere in between. I thought about it. It blew me away when he asked me to do it. And all of a sudden I realized in the next couple of days that was going to be my destiny. I had to find out. I was sitting in the biomed library one day while researching an article on anxiety because I had found no analytical articles on stuttering per se, and I was going on this article and my hand started to go down. I was finishing the article and it went down and it saw a thing that said a statement, calendar of events for the New York Psychoanalytic Institute, which was a place where you become an analyst. And it said May 1950, and one of the articles had the word stutter in it. And I was thrown back. First time ever. Well, I knew I had to read that article. It said on the side of the article, unpublished. So I immediately ran out of the library, the biomed library at UCLA, got on the phone, which I hated to do because I stammered so badly, but I called the librarian at the New York Psychoanalytic Institute. She answered the phone, and I said, does this essay, which was written almost 50 years ago at that time, still exist? She says, hold on, I'll check. Comes back in a few moments and says, yes, but you can't look at it because the guy that wrote it, Dr. Irving Glauber, long since passed, and his estate owns it, and we have no idea who would be responsible, say, for for the essay. I said, okay, thank you very much. Well, that was not going to stop me. I got on the plane, the red eye that night. I was living in LA, which was about 75 degrees in December. But guess what, folks? It wasn't 75 degrees in New York. It was snowing when I got there at 6 o'clock in the morning. Yes, folks, snowing. And I was dressed like I was in Southern California. I took the taxi cab in from the airport, and it was about 7 o'clock. I saw he dropped me off right by the Institute. Across the street I went. It was warm. I had some breakfast, and I waited till somebody was coming up the steps of this big old building. I saw somebody come up about 9:30. I ran across the street, which I shouldn't have done. I almost slipped and fell on the ice and stone. I still remember this like it was yesterday. And folks, in my mind, it was like yesterday. But I walked up the steps, and she saw me. She asked me, what am I doing here? She didn't know who I was. And then as soon as I said, I'm here for it, and I started stuttering, she says, you must be Bob Baker. I said, yes. She said, but I told you. She said, well, come inside. It's snowing out here, and you're not dressed for it. So she took me inside. She took me downstairs. She said, she had put the in the basement. She had put the printer on, or the copier, I should say, on, and she left the essay in this file. And the essay, for those who are old enough, will know it was on the still original onion skin. So I started copying it, like fast. Then I said, okay, I'm going to go right past her, and she'll never know I copied it. Well, folks, I walked up the steps, the spiral staircase of this old analytical institute in New York City, and I was walking past her, and she looked at me, and she said, I hope you made a good copy. She says, why don't you sit down there, read the copy. It's too cold and snowy outside for how you're dressed. Again, how I'm dressed. So I started reading it, and remember, folks, I'd been taking a couple years of analytical essays in this school. Although I was never going to become an analyst or a psychologist, ever. But I started reading it, and after about 5 minutes, she looked at me and she said, wow, The smile on your face, it looks like you've seen the promised land. And I looked back and I said back to her as clear as I could, I now have hope. Well, I read this and I knew in my mind that there was extreme possibilities I may not have to stutter again. At that point in time, I knew I had to get home and find the appropriate psychoanalyst. I had read enough essays to know that a Freudian won't do it. I had to get somebody who knew British object relations theory. As my wife was reviewing the video, she noticed that I was talking too much about, or waxing too much about, the difference between classical Freudian psychoanalysis and contemporary. And she did not realize that I was just so excited because as I was reading the analytical essay at the New York Institute, and what was beaming off my face is that I realized very simply there was now hope of me figuring out what the genesis of stuttering was, not using Freudian, which didn't work, but using contemporary psychoanalytic techniques and theory. I'm constantly asked by friends and by emails and by people who hear about my treatment, why do I focus it to children when it's obviously working for adults too? Well, my answer is quite simple. Because for children, their thought processes are still developing, so therefore for my treatment, they're more pliable, they're more flexible. Whereas by the time you become an adult and you get into advanced ages, and I'm not going to say what those advanced ages are, folks, but your thought process is very developed and it's not so easily changed. The second reason that I don't focus it on adults is I always ask adults who call me, who email me, how are they doing with their relationships, their personal relationships? Are they married? Do they have children? Are they getting along well with their job? Are they basically happy? Have they adapted to their stuttering? If they tell me, yes, everything's going pretty good, we just thought we'd call you to find out, I would say, well, if you're happy with your job, you're content with your job, then because this treatment is long for adults and it could get expensive, your energy is tied up for a long period of time, I don't focus it on adults. Every day I get questions from my website asking me questions pertaining to stuttering. In the future, I would like that anybody has questions, please go to my website where you picked up on this video, and I hope in the new videos to respond to those questions. Thank you very much, and I wish you a pleasant day.